I've spent 7 years in search and rescue, and I've learned that the forest is a predator that learns. It learns your face, it learns your trauma, and it learns your secrets. But lately, the woods aren't just mimicking our voices. They're mimicking our digital footprints. This story belongs to Maya. Maya was an ultramarathon runner and a solo backpacker who documented her life through a high-end smartphone. She was offline adjacent. She'd hike into the deep wilderness of Zion National Park, then upload everything once she hit the trailhead. She disappeared 3 weeks ago in a restricted sector of the Narrows. We found her gear after a 4-day search. Her pack was neatly folded on a flat rock. Her sleeping bag was rolled tight. And sitting right in the center of the rock, face down, was her phone. When we opened it, the gallery was filled with photos of her hike. The first 20 photos were standard: red canyons, winding trails, her own face sweaty and grinning. But at the 3-hour mark, the photos changed. The background started to warp. In one photo, the canyon walls didn't look like sandstone. They looked like a repeating, low-resolution texture, like a video game asset that hadn't finished loading. And Maya wasn't Maya anymore. In every photo taken after that, her features were shifting. Her eyes were slightly too large, her fingers appeared to be fusing together into a single fleshy mitten, and her skin had the smooth plastic sheen of a mid-range AI generation. It was the uncanny valley in physical form. She looked like she was trying to render herself into the canyon. The last photo in the gallery was taken from behind, looking out into the canyon. But there was no canyon, just a massive, infinite grid of black and white squares stretching out into a void. And standing at the edge of that grid, turned toward the camera, was a figure. It was a digital, glitched-out version of Maya, holding a phone, pointing the lens back at the viewer. But it wasn't just the photos. I checked the phone's browser history. It was flooded with millions of search requests from the last hour of her life. Searches for how to escape the loop, why is the sky repeating, and how to log out of reality. We found Maya 2 days later, curled up in a shallow cave 6 miles from the trailhead. She was staring at a blank, flat rock wall. She was moving her fingers across the surface of the stone over and over again in a precise, rhythmic swiping motion. When I reached out to grab her hand, she didn't scream. She didn't look at me. She just stared into the stone, her voice a flat, synthesized monotone. User not found. Please refresh the environment. Swipe up to continue. We had to sedate her to get her out. The doctors say it's a catatonic fugue state induced by extreme isolation, but they can't explain the burn marks on her fingertips, marks that match the exact shape of a smartphone screen, charred deep into her skin. Maya doesn't talk anymore, but her family says that sometimes when she's sleeping, she mumbles in a language that sounds like dial-up modem static. And every time the Wi-Fi in the ward goes down, she wakes up and begins to swipe on the air, her face twisted in a silent, desperate panic. The dead internet theory suggests that most of the content we consume online is generated by bots, mimicking humanity to keep us trapped in an infinite, meaningless cycle. I think the woods found out about that theory. I think the forest decided to start generating its own content. It doesn't need to hunt you with teeth and claws anymore. It just needs to convince you that you're not real, that you're just another file in a loop that stopped loading a long time ago. So if you're hiking and you find a phone that isn't yours, don't look at the gallery. Because once you see the glitch starts looking for you. If you spend any time on r/anti-work or r/recruiting hell, you know the specific type of dread that comes with corporate culture, the mandatory fun, the we're a family gaslighting, and the crushing anxiety of the annual performance review. We've normalized a system where an algorithm decides your worth based on your productivity metrics. In the city, that's just a Tuesday. But in the deep woods of New Hampshire, where the granite is cold and the trees are ancient, the concept of performance takes on a predatory life of its own. This story belongs to Sarah. Sarah was a mid-level project manager for a major logistics firm, the kind that boasts about its disruptive efficiency. She was burnt out, gray, and surviving on black coffee and the desperate hope of a senior promotion. Her company, in its infinite wisdom, decided that the final test for this promotion wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a solo leadership reclamation trek in the White Mountain National Forest. It was mid-October. The presidential range was a riot of red and gold maples, a stunning backdrop for what was essentially a corporate hazing ritual. Sarah was given a GPS with a preset coordinate and told she had 48 hours to reach it. No phone, no contact, just her and her leadership potential. It's about resilience, Sarah, her VP had told her, patting her on the shoulder with a hand that felt like dead weight. Prove you can navigate the unknown. The first day was brutal. Sarah wasn't a hiker, she was a commuter. By nightfall, she was blistered, exhausted, and navigating by headlamp through a section of dense oak and spruce. The fog had rolled in, turning the woods into a wet, gray echo chamber. At exactly 2:14 a.m., Sarah checked her GPS. She was still 5 miles from the coordinate. She collapsed onto a mossy log, fighting back tears of sheer frustration. She just wanted to log out. She wanted to quit. That's when she heard it. It wasn't a bear, and it wasn't the wind. It was a crisp electronic chime, the exact sound of a Microsoft Teams notification. Ding dong. Sarah froze. She looked around, her headlamp cutting through the fog. The sound had come from a cluster of thick pines about 20 yards off the trail. "Hello?" she called out, her voice swallowed by the damp air. Ding dong. The chime happened again, closer this time, and then a voice began to speak. It was her boss's voice. It was perfect. The same condescending lilt, the same vocal fry, the same forced professionalism that made Sarah's skin crawl. The voice didn't sound like it was coming from a person. It sounded like it was projected through the bark of the trees. "Sarah, thank you for joining this impromptu sync," the voice said, echoing from the trunk of a massive oak. "We noticed a drop in your output during the third quarter. We need to discuss your alignment with the company's core resilience metric." Sarah stood up, her heart hammering against her ribs. This had to be a hallucination. "Mr. Davies, are you out here?" "We value your contribution, Sarah," the voice continued, ignoring her. "But we need to address the Reddit time, October 4th, 2:17 p.m. You spent 20 minutes reading r/work reform. This behavior does not demonstrate owner mindset. Please provide a justification for this utilization of company-paid bandwidth." Sarah backed away, but the forest was no longer silent. Every tree seemed to be picking up the signal. "Performance alert," a new voice chipped in from a birch tree, the sterile tone of the automated HR system. "Sarah Miller, current resilience score, 42%. Minimum promotion threshold, 85%. Failure to realign will result in immediate separation of services." The trees began to shift. The underbrush tangled together, forming tight, square, chest-high enclosures of wood and thorn, like a series of biodegradable cubicles. The path forward was gone. I was just taking a break," Sarah screamed into the gray fog. "I've worked 80 hours a week for this company. I haven't seen my family in months." "That is a personal work-life balance decision, Sarah," the boss's voice retorted, sounding directly over her right shoulder. "It is not a metric we track. We track results. And right now, your results are underperforming the environment." Sarah felt the ground beneath her boots begin to vibrate. The oak tree that had first spoken split open, not with a crash, but with a slow, agonizing groan of wood fibers parting. From the dark heart of the trunk, a solid gray object began to push its way out. It wasn't a monster. It was a standard, high-end ergonomic office chair, the Herman Miller Aeron. It was covered in a layer of fine gray mold, and the mesh back was interwoven with thin, black root systems. "Take your seat, Sarah," the automated HR voice commanded. "Your separation of services is scheduled for 3 a.m. We need to process the final paperwork. Your exit interview begins now." The chair slowly turned toward her, its wheels sinking into the moss. The root systems on the back began to writhe, reaching out toward her. "Don't think of it as being fired, Sarah," the boss's voice added, full of sickening concern. "Think of it as being reintegrated back into the environment. We're just right-sizing your existence. It's all part of the cycle." Sarah didn't sit down. She didn't argue. She turned around and she sprinted. She ran blind through the bio-cubicles of briar, ripping her jacket, tearing her skin, not caring where she was going as long as it was away from the ergonomic chair. She ran until her lungs felt like they were filled with crushed glass. Our SAR team found Sarah the next morning. She was huddled under a rock overhang, 3 miles off course. She was catatonic, clutching a single oak leaf in her fist so tight the stem had punctured her palm. When we checked her coordinates on the GPS, the blinking red dot didn't show her location. It was just a static text overlay that read, Session ended. Separation complete. Thank you for your service. Sarah is in a residential treatment center now. They told her it was a dissociative break caused by acute professional stress. They told her she hallucinated the voices, the cubicles, the chair. But I went back to that clearing. I found the oak tree that had split open. It had healed, the bark forming a thick, smooth scar that looked suspiciously like a sealed door. And lying in the dirt directly in front of that tree was Sarah's corporate D badge. The plastic was fused into a small block of oak, the roots of the tree growing right through the magnetic strip. On Reddit, they talk about toxic work cultures and quiet quitting. But in the White Mountains, the forest doesn't care about your resume. It just cares about your energy, and it has a 100-year recruitment cycle. It never stops hiring. It just stops accepting resignations. There is a terrifying phenomenon discussed in certain darker corners of the internet. Stories of people who go to the authorities for help, only to be told that the person they were with never actually existed. They call it institutional gaslighting, when a system designed to protect you instead works to erase your reality. In the urban world, it's a bureaucratic nightmare, but in the Hoh rainforest of Washington state, where the trees are so thick they swallow the sun, it's a death sentence. Here, the system isn't a government. It's a predator wearing a badge. This story belongs to Chloe. Chloe and her best friend Sarah were on what they called a healing hike. Sarah had recently survived a traumatic incident in another park, the kind of event that makes you jump at your own shadow. Chloe thought that taking Sarah into the deep, eternal green of the Pacific Northwest would help her ground herself. She thought the rain would wash away the paranoia. She was wrong. The Hoh rainforest doesn't wash things away. It buries them in moss until they become part of the root system. They were 3 miles past the Hall of Mosses, deep in a sector where the ferns grow taller than a human. The air was a heavy emerald mist. Sarah was struggling, her eyes darting toward every dark gap between the hemlocks. "I feel like I'm being recorded, Chloe," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling, "like the trees are adjusting their resolution as we walk." Chloe tried to laugh it off, though the silence of the woods was starting to feel heavy. "It's just the mist, SAR. It's a rainforest. It's supposed to look like a high-budget movie set." They stopped near a massive fallen Sitka spruce, a nurse log, that was hosting a dozen smaller trees on its decaying back. Sarah stepped behind the massive trunk to adjust her boot. Chloe waited, looking at a strange blue bird that was sitting perfectly still on a low branch. The bird didn't have feathers. It looked like it was made of translucent, injection-molded plastic. "SAR, you okay?" Chloe called out. No answer. Chloe walked around the nurse log. Sarah was gone. There were no footprints in the soft, dark mud, no snapped twigs, just an empty space where her friend had been standing 5 seconds ago. Chloe panicked. She screamed Sarah's name until her throat burned. She ran in frantic circles, her heart hammering a rhythm of pure terror. After 10 minutes of total silence, she saw a flicker of movement through the ferns. A park ranger was standing there. He was wearing the standard issue flat-brimmed hat and the gray and green uniform. But something was fundamentally off. The uniform was too clean, not a single speck of mud or a drop of rain despite the downpour. And the ranger himself? He was too symmetrical. His face looked like it had been perfectly mirrored down the center line. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" the ranger asked. His voice didn't sound like it was coming from a human throat. It sounded like a digital recording played through a speaker with a dying battery. "My friend," Chloe gasped, grabbing his arm. His sleeve felt like cold, stiff vinyl. "Sarah, she was right here. She vanished behind this log." The ranger didn't move. He didn't even look toward the log. He pulled a small black plastic block from his belt. It looked like a radio, but it had no buttons, no antenna, and no brand name. It was just a smooth, black brick. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the ranger said, his voice crackling with a faint layer of static. "Our records indicate you arrived at the trailhead alone. You were driving a 2018 blue sedan. License plate, Delta Echo Alpha Delta." Chloe froze. "I don't own a blue sedan. I drive a silver Jeep. And I definitely didn't come alone. Sarah is right here. Look at the trail log at the entrance." The ranger tapped the plastic block against his thigh. A series of clicking sounds, like a hard drive failing, emitted from his throat. "The log shows one entry, Chloe Miller, 1 occupant. The blue sedan is currently parked in space 14. Would you like me to escort you back to your vehicle? You seem confused. Perhaps it's the lack of oxygen at this altitude. We're at sea level, Chloe screamed, backing away. What is wrong with you? Call for backup. My friend is missing. The ranger tilted his head. The movement was sharp and mechanical. There is no Sarah in the system, Chloe. If you continue to insist on her existence, I'll have to file a report for mental instability. It's for your safety. The Park Service prides itself on its safety record. 0 disappearances in this sector for 50 years. Chloe looked down at the ranger's hands. He was wearing white gloves, but the fabric was stretched so tight she could see the shape underneath. There were no knuckles, no fingernails, just a solid tapered mass of something that looked like pale, wet wood. Then the radio on his belt started to speak, but it wasn't a dispatcher. It was Sarah's voice. Chloe, help me. It's dark in here. He's telling me I'm not real. He's telling me I'm just a file error in the rendering. The ranger didn't even flinch. He reached down and turned down the volume on the plastic block by simply pressing his thumb into the solid casing. The voice was cut off by a burst of white noise. Signal distortion, the ranger said. The trees here create strange acoustic reflections. You should really get back to the blue sedan, Chloe. It's waiting for you. It's been waiting a long time. Chloe realized then that the ranger wasn't an employee. He was a biological interface, a lure designed to process anyone who noticed a glitch in the environment. The blue sedan wasn't a car. It was likely a containment unit designed to look like something familiar from her own subconscious or search history. She turned and ran. She didn't follow the trail. She ran cross-country, through the thorns and the mud. Behind her, she could hear the ranger calling out. He wasn't running, but his voice stayed exactly 10 feet behind her at all times. Chloe, your loyalty metric is dropping. Please return to the vehicle for your mandatory exit interview. As she ran, the forest began to change. The green moss started to look like low-quality green carpet. The trees started to look like painted support beams. She was running through a rendered version of the woods that was falling apart at the seams. She finally burst out onto the paved road, nearly getting hit by a passing tourist bus. The ranger was standing at the edge of the tree line, perfectly still. He didn't step onto the asphalt. He just raised his hand in a stiff, robotic wave. Chloe survived. But when she got to the trailhead parking lot, her silver Jeep was gone. Sitting in space 14 was a 2018 blue sedan. She walked toward it, her hands shaking. She looked through the window. The interior was made of solid, untextured blue plastic. There was no steering wheel, no pedals. Just 2 seats, and on the passenger seat was Sarah's backpack, perfectly preserved, but with a Property of National Park Service tag sewn into the strap. People talk about the Mandela effect or government cover-ups. But in the Hoh rainforest, we know the truth. The Park Service doesn't look for people. It looks for errors. And if you are one of them, they will send someone in a uniform to correct you. Beware of anyone with perfect symmetry. And if you are offered a seat in a car you've never owned, just keep running. Because in the deep woods, there is no help desk. There are only administrators who very much dislike it when the files start to argue back. I've spent hundreds of hours behind this microphone, narrating the disappearances of hikers, the glitches in the mountains, and the rangers who aren't quite human. Most of you listen to this for the chills, for that pleasant spike of adrenaline before you go back to your safe, brightly lit lives. But in search and rescue, we don't get to turn off the recording. Once you start looking into the gaps of the world, the gaps start looking back. This final account isn't about a missing hiker. It's about me. 2 years ago, I was part of a recovery team in the high peaks of the Adirondacks. We had found a victim, a woman who had been missing for 6 days. She was physically unharmed, but her mind was completely overwritten. She was sitting in a clearing, humming a frequency that made the birds in the trees drop dead from the branches. When I knelt down to wrap a blanket around her, she didn't look at my face. She stared directly at the back of my neck. Her eyes went wide, and for the first time in 6 days, she spoke. "It's so small," she whispered, "but it's already got the hooks in. The black hand is wrapping around your spine." I laughed it off. I told her she was just suffering from exposure. I told her she was seeing shadows. But that night when I got home and stood between 2 mirrors in my bathroom, I saw it. At the base of my skull, right where the spine meets the brain, there was a mark. It wasn't a bruise and it wasn't a mole. It was a perfect, blackened fingerprint. It looked like someone had pressed a thumb of pure soot against my skin and held it there until the color bled into the flesh. I tried to scrub it off. I used alcohol, soap, even a pumice stone until the skin was raw and bleeding. The mark didn't fade. In fact, the more I struggled with it, the clearer it became. I started noticing a pattern. Every time I record an episode, every time I give a voice to the things that happen in the woods, the mark grows. It's no longer just a fingerprint. There are thin, spindly black lines spreading out from the center, following the path of my nerves. They look like the roots of a hemlock tree, reaching down toward my shoulder blades. The doctors call it idiopathic hyperpigmentation. They tell me it's a rare reaction to stress or perhaps a localized fungal infection from the damp forest air, but they can't explain why the mark is cold to the touch. Even in a 100 degrees Fahrenheit heat wave, that spot on my neck feels like a block of mountain ice. And then there are the dreams. I don't dream about my life anymore. I dream about being rendered. I dream that I'm standing in a forest made of solid blue plastic, and a ranger is standing over me with a black block, telling me that my file is corrupted. He tells me that the only way to fix the error is to stop talking, but I can't stop, because I've realized that these stories aren't just entertainment, they are warnings. And the mark on my neck? It's not a scar. It's a property of tag. The forest doesn't just want your body, it wants your narrative. It wants to be documented so it can find new ways to interface with the world. Every time you listen to this, you're helping it load. So the next time you're in the shower or you're standing between two mirrors, check the back of your neck. Look for the small black fingerprint. Look for the roots. If you find it, don't try to scrub it off. It only makes the roots grow faster. Just stay in the light, keep your phone off, and pray that the system doesn't decide to sync your data tonight. Because once they know where you're broken, they never stop trying to get inside. Good night, everyone, and stay off the trails.